Genghis Khan may have slept with more women than any ruler or person in history. He kept over 500 concubines, but that number likely represents only a fraction of his total lovemaking activity. His encounters with women were typically brief, and Khan likely did not form many personal attachments. Women were rarely seen again once they had been with him. They were often taken from defeated cities, gifted by his allies, or recruited into the court as part of a tribute system. If they became pregnant, they were usually relocated to other cities or royal residences. When children were born, they were raised with local elites but carried the Khan bloodline, creating loyalty across regions. Khan's bedmates were part of a plan to use intimacy as a method to consolidate power. Populating his children across Asia allowed him to spread loyalty, along with his seed. His sons and grandsons followed the same model, using reproduction as a tool for expansion. While this practice was common for rulers of the time, even by ancient standards, Genghis Khan's numbers are staggering. Modern genetic research backs up the scale. Around 1 in 200 men alive today carry a nearly identical Y chromosome, all pointing to a single male ancestor born in Mongolia during Genghis Khan's lifetime, most likely Genghis himself. That's over 16 million men alive today descended directly from Genghis Khan. If we include those from daughters and indirect lines, then the total number of descendants from Genghis Khan is likely in the hundreds of millions of people. Khan passed away in 1227, likely from exhaustion, but the legacy of his various activities are still around today, 800 years later. Fidel Castro's body count sounds fake, 35,000 women. That's the estimate given by Castro's former bodyguards, defectors, and even U.S. intelligence sources. The claim, 2 different women a day for over 4 decades. Castro came into power in 1959. By the time he was in his 30s, he was already head of state, commander-in-chief, and the most photographed man in the Western Hemisphere. And he was rarely alone. His security staff reportedly acted as gatekeepers and recruiters, identifying women like groupies after speeches, parades, or rallies. Some accounts say Castro had a clear type. He favored European women, particularly those with aristocratic backgrounds or German heritage. He didn't chase these women, at least not in public. He let others bring women to him. And once alone, he was known to be attentive, patient, and persuasive, with what one journalist called the calm arrogance of someone who always got what he wanted. Some women, especially foreign visitors, were briefed in advance, told not to initiate conversation, not to speak first, and to wait for him to signal interest. And when he did, it was subtle, a glance, or an invitation to share a meal late at night in one of his compounds. Once selected, they were taken to guest houses or private residences. Some stayed for a night, others stayed for months. A few were even given apartments, drivers, and their own personal protection. Over time, Castro was rumored to have at least 10 children, all by different women, though only a few were acknowledged. His personal affairs were treated like state protocol. Even Cuba's intelligence agency, the DGI, helped manage logistics of his playboy activities. They coordinated rendezvous, conducted background checks, and kept their mouths shut. The system worked like a well-oiled machine. Caligula ruled Rome from 37 to 41 CE and used the palace as his personal playground. He's reported to have turned part of the imperial residence into a brothel, where he chose partners from the wives of senators, aristocrats, and sometimes their daughters. He would invite couples to dinner, take the wife away mid-meal, sleep with her, then return to describe the experience, sometimes in front of the husband. He also had relations with his own sisters, especially Drusilla. Roman sources say he was obsessed with her. He treated her like a wife, had her seated beside him in state ceremonies, and may have fathered a child with her. When she passed away, he ordered public mourning at a level normally reserved for emperors. Afterward, his behavior reportedly became more erratic. Caligula demanded to be worshipped as a living god. He installed his statue in temples, referred to himself as Jupiter, and ordered priests to sacrifice to his image. In Caligula's court, acts of intimacy weren't private. They were public dominance rituals. He did so to prove that no law, custom, or person could limit what he did. Roman sources describe him keeping female and male partners from across Roman society: nobles, performers, palace staff, and personal attendants. His type seemed to be anyone that would give him power. If someone was within reach, Caligula would make sure they knew who was in charge, and he had a good time doing it. In 41 BC, his own bodyguards assassinated him in the palace hallway. He was 28 years old. Throughout Catherine the Great's 34-year reign over Russia, she had it raining men. She openly took a long list of lovers, some of them decades younger, and nearly all of them came from the Russian nobility or military officer class. These weren't servants or entertainers, they were men already within the power structure. Those lucky enough to be chosen as a lover might be promoted to a high-ranking position or granted a lifelong pension. When she lost interest in a lover, they were quietly dismissed. This system wasn't framed as bribery or exchange. These men were rewarded because they were close to her, physically and politically. This was not uncommon in 18th century Russia. Catherine's difference was that she was a woman doing it openly. The relationships weren't secret. They were known in the court, discussed in foreign diplomatic reports, and managed like part of the imperial household. Catherine's free spirit triggered a backlash. Political rivals and satirists invented rumors to damage her reputation. Most famously, the horse myth, a fabricated story with no evidence, designed purely to humiliate her. We won't get into it here, but it involved Catherine engaging in inappropriate activity with a stallion. That rumor stuck because Catherine lived without a king, took partners openly, and ruled on her own terms. That made her dangerous, and an open target for humiliation. King Farouk I of Egypt has been described as having slept with over 5,000 women. Farouk came to power at just 16 years old and was hailed as Egypt's young modernizer. But by the time he was 30, he was already infamous for his insatiable appetites, especially for women. He kept 2 official wives, but dozens, possibly hundreds of unofficial partners. His bodyguards helped bring women into the palace. Some were local dancers, nightclub performers, or actresses. Others came from European high society. Most came and went quietly, and were given ample compensation for their services. He was rumored to hold private group encounters in secret wings of Aberdeen Palace. He kept bedroom logs, according to some former staff, and reportedly bragged about needing multiple women a day just to stay calm. But there's a twist. Some close to the palace whispered that Farouk may have actually been dysfunctional in the bedroom. British intelligence reports from the late 1940s describe him as exaggerated in talk, unimpressive in performance. One biographer claimed he would often have women display themselves while he watched, never touching them. The 5,000 figure may reflect not real activity, but the scale of the operation built around him. A king who wanted to be seen as a conqueror, even if he couldn't rise to the occasion. By the early 1950s, his image was collapsing. He was obese, drinking heavily, and spending more time chasing women than attending cabinet meetings. He was forced to abdicate in 1952 after a military coup, in the end proven to be an impotent leader. The Bible says that King Solomon had 1,000 women in his harem. According to 1 Kings 11:3, He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. That's not throughout his lifetime. That was all at the same time. No other ruler in the biblical world or anywhere in the ancient Near East is recorded with numbers near this high. The concubines were women of lower status. Some were given to Solomon as tribute by subordinate groups. Others were offered by elite families inside Israel as a way to gain favor. Concubines had fewer rights and less recognition than the wives, but they still lived within the palace system. Their role was simple: serve the king, bear his children, and disappear into the system. As for the wives, most weren't Israelites. They were the daughters of foreign kings. You see, each of Solomon's marriages was a calculated move, not for love, but for leverage. Bringing a princess into the palace meant her father became an ally instead of a potential threat. It was a sort of peace treaty disguised as a wedding. And the wives didn't just come with their royal blood, they came with their gods. Solomon allowed his wives to keep their religious practices and even supported them. He ordered the construction of shrines and worship sites for their deities, which had been explicitly forbidden by Israelite law. These sites were visible from Jerusalem, and some were built on the hills overlooking the city, in full view of the temple Solomon had constructed for the God of Israel. Seeing this, the high priests were furious, and according to the biblical account, so was God. From 1 Kings 11:9-11, the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." Louis XV began his reign as Louis the Well-Beloved. By the end of his life, the French public saw him as a self-indulgent relic who was more interested in teenage girls than in ruling a troubled kingdom. Louis had many mistresses throughout his reign, but most well-known was Madame de Pompadour. She started as his lover, but after their physical relationship ended, she was in charge of what the court would politely call the king's amusements. Pompadour personally selected young women to entertain him. These girls were vetted, trained, and dressed to meet the king's tastes, then introduced gradually through informal visits or staged court gatherings. If he showed interest, they were relocated to discreet housing or given minor court titles. Louis XV maintained a private compound known as Parc aux Cerfs, the Deer Park. Here, a rotating selection of young girls was kept for the king's personal use. Most of the girls were between 14 and 17 years old. They were promised financial security and installed in secret housing. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. The compound was maintained with public funds. There was a full-time staff dedicated to managing the king's preferences, ensuring a constant supply of new girls, and making sure nothing leaked into the official record. It did leak, and so we're talking about it here. Nero treated his imperial palace like a private theater, an X-rated one. Nero took both male and female lovers, often multiple at a time. He held private ceremonies where he symbolically married at least 3 men, treating them as formal partners. One of the most significant women in his life was Pompeia Sabina, his second wife. Nero allegedly kicked her during a pregnancy, causing an abrupt end to her life. No problem for Nero. He just turned his attention to a young boy named Sporus who resembled her. Sporus was forced to live in the palace dressed as Pompeia, given her name, and presented in public as Nero's companion. The entire Roman court was expected to play along. A bridal dowry was even paid. Sporus was paraded beside him in public events and dressed in imperial silks. Nero blurred every boundary: gender, role, consent, identity. He himself dressed in women's clothes at festivals. He played the bride in mock weddings. He surrounded himself with lovers, actors, and members of the imperial court who were expected to perform their roles no matter how degrading. His behavior was out of control. When rumors of rebellion started to rise, Nero kept spending on palaces, performers, and feasts filled with debauchery. No matter how many partners he took or performances he staged, it didn't seem to be enough. He took his own life at age 30 after being declared a public enemy by the Senate. Maharaja Bhupinder Singh's official harem was said to contain 365 concubines, one for each day of the year, and they were maintained, rotated, and managed like a royal calendar. From 9 years old, he ruled the princely state of Patiala from 1900 to 1938. His lifestyle of luxury was legendary. 20 Rolls-Royces, hunting trips with British generals, solid gold dining sets, and the Patiala necklace, a custom Cartier piece featuring nearly 3,000 diamonds. But the centerpiece of his excess was his private life. He kept a dedicated pleasure palace for his concubines, women brought in from across India and further. Royal staff scheduled their time with the Maharaja and ensured that no visit overlapped with another. Bhupinder Singh also had 10 official wives and fathered at least 88 children, many of whom would later serve as diplomats, soldiers, and advisors. Augustus the Strong was known for two things: unmatched physical strength and unmatched reproductive output. By the end of his life, rumors claimed that he had fathered over 350 illegitimate children across Saxony, Poland, and beyond. While the exact number is debated, what's not in doubt is that he was yet another ruler who treated intimacy as a tool of dynasty building, and he kept no secret about it. He maintained an open roster of long-term mistresses who were housed in court residences, appeared in public, and were often granted titles and estates. His reputation for virility became part of his brand. He was nicknamed Augustus the Strong, not just for reportedly bending iron bars with his bare hands, but for the scale and frequency of his private affairs. Court gossip rumored him as a ruler who could outdrink, outfight, and outbreed any rival. That being said, there was a political function to his activities as well. Augustus acknowledged many of the children born from his various relationships, and then used them. Some were given minor noble titles, others married into important families, and more than a few were used to create local loyalties or buy diplomatic goodwill. His ability to place bloodlines across noble houses was a strategy. More children meant more loyalty. In the short term, this may have worked out for him, and he undoubtedly enjoyed the effort to put this plan into place. However, in the long term, his formal line of succession was still contested. For all the offspring he left behind, very few were considered legitimate. Grandson of Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, was a chip off the old block. Kublai Khan didn't just inherit Genghis's empire, he inherited a method. Women were brought in as political offerings, and relationships were used to secure alliances where his children were positioned to extend control. His imperial harem reportedly held thousands of women, sourced from across the empire and sorted by rank, ethnicity, and access. Women were brought in from China, Korea, Central Asia, and the Mongol steppes. Once inside, they were assigned status: primary wives, imperial consorts, and lower-tier concubines, each with different privileges and levels of access. And of course, Kublai had access to them all. Records show they were put on a constant rotation for both variety of companionship and for childbearing. Kublai himself was known for extreme indulgence. His palace in Dadu, modern-day Beijing, included entire wings devoted to pleasure, and was built for an emperor who no longer moved with an army, but sat at the center of it all. Literally, He grew physically massive in later years and struggled to even stand without support. Unlike Grandpa Genghis, who used reproduction as a side effect of the conquest, Kublai flipped the script and built a palace where the spoils arrived at his feet. Sultan Ibrahim, aka Ibrahim the Mad, kept one of the largest harems in Ottoman history. Hundreds of women, many brought in as political gifts or hand-selected by his court. Ibrahim spent most of his early life locked inside the kafes, a sort of prison aimed to prevent rival heirs from overthrowing the current ruler. He was released in 1640 at the age of 25 and immediately made sultan, even though he was emotionally and politically unprepared to rule. So he spent most of his rule consumed by pleasure. He favored extremely large-bodied women, reportedly searching for concubines who weighed over 300 pounds. One of his most notorious favorites was a woman named Shakirpare, whose name literally means sugar cube. She rose to enormous influence, not just over the Sultan, but over the flow of appointments and resources inside the court. This was a common MO for Ibrahim. The women who joined him in his bedroom weren't just one-night flings. They became part of how the empire was run. Ibrahim distributed titles, estates, and cash based on his moods and affections. Court officials and military appointments could hinge on who had his ear that week. And most weeks he was deep inside the harem. But the pleasure didn't last. At one point, Ibrahim was reportedly presented with rumors, real or fabricated, that women in the harem had been disloyal to him. His response wasn't an investigation, it was execution. He ordered 280 concubines, almost the entire harem, bound in weighted sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus Strait. No trial, no proof, just a massive purge. Some records say the number was lower, some say it was higher, but the event is consistently reported in Ottoman sources as one of the most extreme acts of violence inside the imperial palace. A fatwa declaring Ibrahim unfit to rule was issued. His ministers removed him, imprisoned him, and palace guards took his life in 1648. King Henry VIII was obsessed with producing a male heir to his throne, and to do so married 6 women and pursued dozens of others. There's also the 2 queens he beheaded. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, gave him a daughter but no surviving sons. When her chances of bearing another child faded, Henry began pursuing Anne Boleyn. But the Pope refused to annul his first marriage. Fine. Henry just tore England out of the Catholic Church to make it happen and legitimize his next queen, Anne Boleyn. But 2.5 years later, she was executed on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, charges historians still debate. What's not debated is that Anne didn't produce a male heir either. His third wife, Jane Seymour, gave him a son but passed away days later. He called her his true wife. The rest didn't get that honor. Then there was Anne of Cleves, who was discarded after 6 months. Henry claimed she was unattractive and said the marriage was never consummated. Next was Catherine Howard, just 17 years old. She was executed after being accused of multiple affairs. Throughout all this, Henry kept mistresses, many of whom were relatives or attendants of his wives. One of the most famous was Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister, who may have borne him children. Few of these women were publicly acknowledged. Most were used, then married off or dismissed. And finally, there was Catherine Parr, who survived him, but only because he passed away before he had time to knock her off. In the end, Henry VIII left a fractured kingdom, and a list of women who were either executed, erased, or lucky enough to escape. Thanks for watching the video and making it to the end. I hope it left you as satisfied as many of these rulers. There should be another video on the screen that YouTube thinks you might like, so check it out. And if you've made it this far, you probably liked this video, so please make it official and give us a like. It really helps the channel. And let us know which of these rulers you love or hate the most. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again. See you next time.